I'd like to introduce you to, navigating in the viewport for this video, but before we do, I'd like to show you how to save your project, best practices for saving projects in Maya. So before I go ahead and hit File, Save As, what I'd like to do is create a project folder for each project. So for each week, you should have a different project folder. You could also have multiple, one project folder that's just for demo work, and then you should have a project folder for each project. And I'm going to do that by going to Set Project here under File. And I've already found it, but you're going to want to locate a particular location on your computer in order to save all of your files to. And so in this case, I've set up in my Documents folder a folder called 2021 3D Modeling. And this is the folder in which I'm going to save all my projects. So I'm going to go over here to this icon, and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this Week 1. I'm going to go ahead and set. And I'm going to say, let's create a default workspace. When this dialog box pops up, create a default workspace. And now my project folder has been set. I can find it here under my Finder, Documents, 2021, 3D Modeling, Week 1. And I have my default workspace. It's been created. This is just a script that, that gives information for how to open and process our scenes, okay? The next step I'd like you to do is go to File, and above Set Project here, we have Project Window. And Project Window will add a bunch of default folders within our project folder, and this is where we will end up saving and accessing all of the data that is associated with our particular project. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Accept. And now if I go to File or Finder and find that folder again, now within my project folder, I have all of these subsequent folders that have been populated here. And so things like our scenes will all be saved under the scenes folder. All of our rendered images will render out to the images folder, etc. So now if I go ahead and hit File, Save Scene As, I can save this scene, let's say as Demo 1, and it will save it. Here you can see at the very top, we're saving it into the scenes folder of our Week 1 project folder. So this is just a really good way to stay organized with all of your work, and it's really important once we start to use textures and render out images that we maintain this kind of workflow. We have two different file types here, Maya binary and Maya ASCII. I just use Maya binary, and I would recommend that. And then I go ahead and hit Save. So to navigate in the viewport, now I have my Demo 1 file. Navigating in the viewport does require a 3-button mouse. And we have, it requires a 3-button mouse, or I have some capabilities for using some tools here, but we really want to be using our 3-button mouse to Command. If I hit Command and the left mouse button, now I'm toggling around my workspace. Command and middle mouse button, and I can pan. And then if I hit Alt or Option and right mouse button, I'm dollying in or out the perspective camera. Now I know this is actually how we're going to be using some of the components, how to access the components of our objects. I know that there are icons here that allow you to toggle, pan, and zoom. I don't know where they are. You're going to have to look that up yourself because I've always operated using a 3-button mouse. So go ahead and get one if you haven't yet. Otherwise, look it up how you can navigate without it. I can also use my middle mouse wheel to kind of zoom in and out. I'm not really zooming necessarily. This is actually a camera object that's in the scene, and I'm moving that camera in and out. I'm not zooming in and out on a lens. But so the next thing I want to show you is how to use our transform tools. And our transform tools here are rotate, scale, and move. So to do that, I'm gonna have to have an object in my scene. And even though this week we're going to be working with curves and surfaces, I'm just going to introduce you to some of the functionality of Maya, working with components. These channel box an attribute editor here, and also how to use these transform tools by using a polygon primitive. So I'm just going to go ahead and click this sphere here. And now I have an object that's popped up in my scene. And now I have also some information about that object on the right-hand side under the attribute editor. And also the channel box editor now has been filled with information about this particular object. If I go to my outliner, now you can see that in my list of all the objects that are in my scene, we can add P-sphere1 as an object that's in our scene. So in order to manipulate this object, we'll use the transform tools, and that is, there's some hotkeys. That would be W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. So to move this object, there's a couple ways that I can do it. I can, and this is probably the easiest way, is just to highlight one of the axes, and this will allow you to move that object within that particular direction, up and down, in the X direction or in the Z direction. You also see that there are some values here within our channel box, which allow us to type numerical values. So if I want to be really specific about where in the virtual space I want this object, I'm going to go ahead and type those values in here. These are all of the global transform. This is all of the global transform information for this particular object is found here in the channel box layer editor. So this tells you specifically where in the entire scene this particular object is located, which direction it's rotated, and then how it's scaled. If I click on the tab Attribute Editor here, what I can see about this object is that I have a number of different tabs. These are all called nodes, and these are packets of information that describe this virtual object. So if I go to P-sphere1, this is just saying this is an object with these transform attributes. This says that it has a particular polygon shape, and again, these are all just different bits of code and information that you don't have to worry about that describe this object. And I have, again, a number of nodes here. So just know that we are going to get into really specifying the look of this object by using some of these attributes here that are in the attribute editor. But here are, again, we can find our transform, our kind of global transform information, our attributes here in the attribute editor and this first tab, or in the channel box editor. I'm able to rotate by hitting R or pressing this icon. And again, I like to use the kind of indicator here and clicking and dragging on these different lines to change the value in each axis. If I kind of don't click on one of the axes lines there, and I just kind of click on the overall tool itself, then I'm able to kind of freeform the direction, freeform its rotation. But this is kind of, maybe not such a great way to work because we're only looking at this object in, we only have a 2D view. We can kind of pan around it to see it, but I would recommend, kind of with some, to use a little bit more specificity in your manipulations of objects here by using these, the little indicators. The same thing for the move tool, I can just kind of click on the object itself and move it somewhere in space, but this will kind of position it randomly, So again, I like to use these axes indicators in order to manipulate and use my transform tools. Same thing for scale. And now you'll see that scale, scale we have, I can scale it in any of the axes. And then the center box scales uniformly in all directions. These little indicators here say I can scale it in 2 directions. And kind of ignoring that whatever color is associated. So I'm kind of scaling this in relation to Z over the X and the Y, for example. And if I go Command Z, I can kind of undo what I've just done. And the same is true here for We have these little squares also when it comes to move. So if I want to move this object, if I wanted to stay static in the x-axis, but move it in the y and the z, now I'm kind of moving it freeform in 2 directions. So those are just some of the different ways that we can use these transform tools to be able to manipulate objects. I can also here in the channel box editor turn on and off the visibility of this object by pressing 1 for visible and 0 for invisible. So if I want to hide or show different objects, that's what this little box does here. But again, I can rotate. If I want to like reset my rotation, I can go ahead and just, or reset its translation. Also, I can set those all back to 0 and it will send it back to the center of the scene.